The men began unloading lumber. Not the rough, splintered wood of a fence line, Ilse noted, but smooth, fresh planks of pine. The sharp, clean scent of newly cut wood drifted toward them on the breeze, a smell so wholesome and normal it felt utterly out of place, momentarily cutting through the camp's usual odor of dust and boiled vegetables. A hammer rang out, sharp and rhythmic. Thwack, thwack, thwack. They watched for an hour. The men tore the old boards from the windows. They swept the inside, clouds of dust billowing from the doorway. They seemed to be repairing it, making it habitable. It is for new arrivals, Greta concluded, her voice flat. More mouths, less food, Ilse was not so sure. The work was too careful. One of the male internees, a man with the broad shoulders of a carpenter, was measuring boards, calling out numbers to Evans, who scribbled in a notebook. It looked less like construction and more like craftsmanship. Then the second truck arrived. This one was smaller, a flatbed. It backed up to the barracks door. Evans and the carpenter climbed onto the truck bed. They were not unloading more wood. They were handling something wrapped in heavy canvas. They moved with a slow, deliberate care, as if handling something fragile or important. "Look," Ilse breathed, grabbing Greta's arm. The two men lifted the object. As they did, the canvas slipped. It was not a workbench or a cot or a new set of shackles. It was a simple, dark, wooden cross, easily 8 feet tall. Ilse and Greta stared, frozen. The men carefully maneuvered it through the doorway. Ilse felt a wave of dizziness. She put a hand against the warm earth to steady herself. A cross. Why would they bring a cross? "It is a mockery," Greta whispered, her face pale. "It must be a trick." "To make us what?" "I do not know," Ilse said. The hammering inside the barracks resumed, but the sound felt different now. Rumors began to fly through the compound by lunchtime, passed in whispers over the laundry lines and in the mess hall. They were building something. Some said it was a gallows. Some said it was a new office. But Ilse and Greta knew what they had seen. They had seen the cross, and they could not reconcile it with the enemy they had been taught to fear. The hammering stopped on Friday. On Saturday morning, following the roll call, the sergeant returned to Barracks 4B. "Major Davis wants you," he said, gesturing with his head toward the renovated building. "All of you now." The walk across the compound was silent. The other internees watched them, their faces blank. Ilse felt the familiar cold dread return. The cross, the wood, the census, it was all leading to this. A performance, a test? They gathered in a loose, fearful semicircle on the parched grass outside the open doors of the former storage shed. They huddled together, reluctant to get too close, as if the building itself were a trap. Major Davis was waiting inside, along with Private Evans, who stood awkwardly by the wall. Ilse stared past them. The interior bore no resemblance to the derelict shed it had been. The smell of pine and fresh paint was strong, clean. The boarded windows had been replaced with clear glass panes properly glazed, which allowed the morning light to flood the room. The floors were swept clean. At the far end, centered against the wall, stood the large, dark wooden cross they had seen. Below it was a simple table, draped with a clean white handkerchief, or perhaps a tablecloth, Ilse realized, much larger than Frau Meyer's. It was flanked by 2 simple wooden benches. The room was sparse, but it was not hostile. "It was peaceful. Come in," Major Davis said. His voice was not soft, but it lacked its usual command authority. It was an invitation. No one moved. They remained clustered at the threshold, paralyzed by a lifetime of propaganda and a year of internment. Davis sighed, a faint puff of exasperation. He stepped out into the sunlight, forcing them to look at him. "You were counted," he said, "because we needed to know." This facility, as per the Geneva Conventions concerning the rights of civilian internees, must provide for religious needs. Ilse translated the phrase in her head. Religious needs. It sounded cold, bureaucratic. "This," he said, gesturing to the building behind him, "is the camp chapel. It is interdenominational. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the women. Frau Meyer's hand flew to her mouth. Greta stared at Davis, her eyes wide with disbelief. Services will be coordinated, Davis continued, pulling out his notebook as if discussing mess hall duties. The Lutheran service conducted by yourselves, he nodded at Greta, will be Sunday at 9. The Catholic service will be at 10. Ilse's mind struggled to process the words chapel, service, Lutheran, Catholic. She looked at the cross, then at Davis. Her throat felt tight. They did not burn our Bibles. The thought was so profound, so jarring, it almost knocked her off balance. They built a house for them, we are aware, Davis said, his gaze settling on Ilse and then Frau Meyer, that you have been unable to attend Mass. He paused, and for the first time, Ilse thought she detected something complex in his expression. Not kindness, perhaps, but a recognition of their humanity. The Bishop of Dallas has been contacted. A local priest, Father Steiner, he speaks German, will be here tomorrow at 1000 hours to hear confession and celebrate Mass. Frau Meyer began to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. Ilse felt her own eyes sting. A priest, confession, a German-speaking priest. It was an impossible kindness, a gesture so profoundly contrary to her expectations of the enemy that she felt her foundation of fear and hatred begin to crack. On Sunday morning, a new kind of silence fell over the camp. The air was still heavy with heat, but it was charged with anticipation. The Lutheran service at 9 o'clock was quiet. Ilse watched from her barracks window as Greta and the others walked to the chapel, entered, and emerged an hour later, their faces composed but unreadable. At 10 minutes before 10, Ilse helped Frau Meyer navigate the dusty walk. The other Catholic women fell in behind them, a small, nervous flock. They were wearing their cleanest dresses, their hair combed flat. As they approached, Ilse saw Private Evans standing near the open door. He was not blocking the entrance, but simply standing at ease, his rifle pointed toward the ground. The sight of the weapon sent a familiar jolt of fear through her. A guard. They are watching us pray. She hesitated at the threshold, but Frau Meyer, emboldened by some new, desperate hope, pulled her forward. They stepped inside. The room was cool, the harsh Texas sunlight softened by the clean glass windows. The simple white tablecloth on the altar seemed impossibly bright. In the corner, one of the women from another barracks, a music teacher from Munich, Ilse had heard, was seated at a small, dusty pump organ. A man in civilian clothes stood by the altar, arranging a chalice and a missal. He was old, with kind eyes and thin white hair. As they entered, he turned and smiled. "Guten Morgen," he said. "Ich bin Pater Steiner. Good morning. I am Father Steiner." The sound of their native language, spoken in a place of peace, was shocking. The women found places on the simple benches. Ilse guided Frau Meyer to the front. Ilse looked back. To her surprise, Greta had not left after the Lutheran service. She was sitting alone on the back bench, a silent observer, her arms crossed. Father Steiner put on his vestments and turned to the altar. "Introibo ad altare Dei," he began. Ilse's response was automatic, a whisper from 1,000 mornings in Stuttgart. "Ad Deum qui letificat juventutem meam." To God, who gives joy to my youth. The ancient Latin, a ritual unchanged by borders or barbed wire, wrapped around her. She knelt, her knees protesting on the hard wooden floor. She watched the familiar gestures, the Confiteor, the Kyrie. Then Father Steiner turned for the homily. He looked out at the small congregation of wary, tired faces. He spoke in German. "I am told," he began, his voice gentle, "that many of you are afraid. You are far from home. You are in a strange land. But God is not strange. He is here, in this heat, as he was in the snows of Bavaria." Frau Meyer, who had been listening with rapt attention, slowly reached into her pocket, Her hand emerged, trembling. She was holding her garnet rosary. She did not hide it. She did not clutch it in her lap. She held it openly, the beads resting in her palm for all to see. The organist began to play a soft chord. Father Steiner raised his voice. "Let us sing. Grosser Gott, wir loben dich." Ilse's voice cracked on the first note. She looked at Frau Meyer, holding her rosary without fear. She looked at Greta in the back, watching them with an expression of profound confusion. She looked at Private Evans, standing at the door, dutifully bored. She began to cry, silent, hot tears that she did not bother to wipe away. They were tears of relief, but also of a terrible, unsettling gratitude. The men who held her captive, the godless capitalists she had been taught to despise, had just given her back her God. The chapel changed the atmosphere of the camp. It did not change the barbed wire or the watery stew or the fact that they were prisoners. But it removed the terror. Fear of the guards had been replaced by a routine of awkward avoidance. Frau Meyer's health even improved. She sat outside the chapel in the afternoons, her garnet rosary moving through her fingers in the sunlight, no longer contraband. This new peace, however, was fragile. It was a bubble existing only within the fence line. In late October, Ilse was assigned to cleaning duty in the small administration building. It was a privilege given only to the most compliant women. As she swept the floor of the outer office, she saw two guards, men she did not know, reading a copy of the Dallas Morning News left on a desk.
"They were agitated, can you believe this?"
one said, jabbing the paper.
"They're calling it the Fritz Ritz, talking about that chapel."
"My brother's in the Ardennes," the other guard spat. "He ain't getting a chapel built for him by the Krauts." They folded the paper angrily and left, the door slamming behind them. Ilse waited until their footsteps receded. Her English was still poor, but she recognized chapel and Fritz, a derogatory term she had learned quickly. She smoothed the abandoned newspaper. It was folded to the editorial page. She could not read most of it, but the headline was stark. "Why coddle the enemy in our backyard?" A cold knot formed in her stomach. The backlash. She understood instantly that Major Davis's decision was not popular with the outside world. This explained the new tension she had felt from the guards all week. She finished her work, her mind racing. The kindness they had received was not just an act of one man. It was an act that required political defense. Later that afternoon, she saw Private Evans near the south fence, checking a loose post. He looked tired. He had been the one to find the rosary, the one who reported them. Yet he was also the one who stood guard at the Mass, his face impassive. Ilse approached him slowly. It was against the rules to engage guards in conversation, but she did not care. "Private," she said, her voice quiet. Evans startled, his hand instinctively moving toward his belt. He relaxed when he saw it was her. "Mum," she fumbled for the English words. "The beads, Frau Meyer." She pointed toward her own pocket, where her rosary now rested. "Safe."
"Thank you, you—"
"Did not take." Evans flushed a deep red, looking down at the ground. He kicked at a stone. I just reported what I saw, ma'am. That's the regulation."
"Unidentified items. It is Rosencrantz," she said. "Rosary."
"For prayer." He looked up, his expression a mixture of profound embarrassment and confusion.
"Yes, ma'am, I know that now." He shifted, clearly uncomfortable.
"To be honest, ma'am," he lowered his voice, "I'm from East Texas. I'm Baptist. We don't have, well," he gestured vaguely.
"I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe it was some kind of signal device."
"For sending codes, or something." Ilse stared at him.
"All their terror.
All their whispered prayers in the dark. All their fear of persecution. And this boy, this child, had not seen a tool of faith. He had seen a piece of enemy equipment. It was not religious malice that night in the barracks. It was bureaucratic ignorance. "It is only prayer," she said softly. "Yes, ma'am," Evans said, nodding quickly as he edged away. Duty calls. Ilse watched him go, the foundation of her worldview shifting once more. November arrived, painting the scrubby landscape of Seagoville in shades of brown and gold. The heat finally broke, replaced by cool mornings that carried the scent of wood smoke. Major Davis had, through Father Steiner, suggested that the internees might wish to observe the American holiday of Thanksgiving. "It is a day," the priest had explained carefully in German, "for acknowledging Providence." The suggestion was met with complicated feelings. Gratitude, yes, but it felt like a betrayal. How could they be thankful for comfortable confinement while their sons and husbands were dying in forests on the other side of the world?
Thankful for what?
For plentiful food while their families starved under Allied bombing? And yet Ilse could not deny the chapel. She could not deny the peaceful masses, or the fact that Frau Meyer's garnet rosary was now a common sight, no longer a symbol of terror. They decided to hold an ecumenical service. Greta and Ilse, now unlikely collaborators, planned it. They would sing Lutheran hymns and Catholic chants. The camp kitchen, in a gesture coordinated by Davis, provided 3 warm pumpkin pies, a taste so foreign, so sweet and spiced with cinnamon that it felt like an artifact from another, gentler world. The chapel was full. November 1st, All Saints' Day, had passed quietly, but this felt different. This was their holiday. They decorated the altar with autumn leaves gathered from the perimeter, and the pies sat on a small table. The white tablecloth seemed to glow in the soft afternoon light. Ilse stood near the front with Frau Meyer. They began with a German hymn, "Nun danket alle Gott," now, "Thank we all our God." The voices were stronger now, less timid than they had been weeks ago. As the hymn concluded, there was a moment of silence. Frau Meyer, overwhelmed by the music, the smell of the pie, and the memory of Thanksgiving's past, began to tremble. Her hand, clutching her rosary, spasmed. The dark garnet beads clattered onto the dusty floorboards. Ilse froze. Beside her, Frau Meyer gasped, a sound of pure mortification. Private Evans, standing his usual post by the door, looked over. His gaze sharpened. Ilse moved without thinking. She dropped her own small songbook. As she bent, she swept the rosary back toward the older woman, shielding the movement with her body. She met the guard's eyes, but this time everything was different. She was not afraid. She felt a fierce protective instinct. She was not hiding contraband from an enemy. She was shielding an old woman's frail dignity from public view. Evans held her gaze. He saw Frau Meyer's tears of embarrassment. He saw Ilse's protective stance.
He understood.
His expression softened almost imperceptibly. He merely nodded curtly, as if at the dropped book, and turned his attention back to the compound outside. Ilse helped Frau Meyer up, pressing the beads back into her trembling hand. "Es ist in Ordnung," she whispered. "It is all right." Later, as they filed out into the cool twilight, Major Davis was standing near the door, observing the dispersal. The women walked past him, some nodding shyly. Ilse stopped. She looked at the man who had authorized the wood, the cross, and the priest. She met his eyes and, using the English she had been practicing, spoke her first words to him. "Thank you," she said. By February 1945, the war in Europe was a dying beast roaring its last. The news trickled into Seagoville through censored letters and snippets of newspaper articles. The atmosphere in the camp was no longer one of terror, but of a profound, anxious limbo. They were safe, they were fed, and they were waiting. The chapel had become the center of their lives, a quiet anchor in the uncertain tide. But Ilse found herself drawn to another building, one she had previously ignored, the camp library. It was housed in a long, quiet barracks, run by a scholarly internee from Japan and overseen by the camp administration. Ilse, whose fear had kept her confined to only the most necessary spaces, now felt a tentative curiosity. The propaganda had told her Americans burned books. Major Davis had built them a chapel. The propaganda had told her they were godless. Father Steiner came every Sunday. The contradictions left a space in her mind, and she felt a sudden, sharp hunger to fill it. One Tuesday, she walked in. The room smelled of old paper, floor wax, and the dry Texas air. It was silent. The librarian, a small, greying Japanese man, looked up from his desk and nodded. Ilse browsed the shelves. There was Shakespeare, Mark Twain, and Goethe. There were books in English, Japanese, and German, stacked neatly. It was not the library of a prison. It was the library of a small town. She found what she was looking for in the religion section. It was a Heilige Schrift, a heavy, leather-bound Lutheran Bible printed in German. Its very existence on this shelf was a final, quiet refutation of her deepest fears. They will burn our Bibles. She ran her hand over the worn cover. They had not burned them. They had catalogued them. She registered for a library card, a small, stiff piece of cardboard with her name typed on it. It felt like an identity. That afternoon, Ilse did not return to her barracks. She took the heavy German Bible and walked to a bench near the chapel, the one that caught the pale winter sun. She sat down, opened the book to the Psalms, and began to read. She was vaguely aware of Private Evans walking his patrol. He saw her, saw the book, and kept walking. After a few minutes, she reached into her pocket. She pulled out her small olive wood rosary. The wood was dark and smooth, polished by a year of anxious prayer in sleeves and under pillows. Now she did not hide it. She held it loosely in her left hand, her fingers tracing the beads as her eyes moved over the German text. She was a German internee on American soil, reading a German Bible provided by an American library, holding a Catholic rosary in plain sight. The cognitive dissonance was complete, a quiet surrender. The chains of propaganda had not been broken by force. They had simply rusted away in the face of small, inexplicable kindnesses. That evening, she wrote a letter home, to be sent through the Red Cross, knowing it might take months to arrive. She did not write about the food, or the dust, or the fences.
She wrote, "I am safe.
They let us pray. We have a chapel. A priest from Dallas comes. He speaks our language." November 1st, 1944, INS internment camp, Segoville, Texas. The scent of lye soap and boiled cabbage hung in the humid air, broken only by the crunch of gravel under boots. Ilse froze, her hand instinctively tightening inside her thin sleeve. Beside her, old Frau Meyer stumbled, a gasp catching in her throat. A dark wooden rosary, contraband, according to the typed rules tacked by the mess hall door, clattered onto the dusty floorboards of the barracks. The American guard stopped. He was young, barely 20. Ilse moved without thinking, dropping her own tin cup. As she bent, she swept the rosary back toward the older woman, shielding the movement with her body. She met the guard's eyes. He stared, his gaze lingering on Frau Meyer's terrified face, then on Ilse. He said nothing, merely nodded curtly at the cup, and continued his patrol. Ilse helped Frau Meyer up, pressing the beads back into her trembling hand.
"Es ist in Ordnung," she whispered. Hat nichts gesehen. It is all right."
He saw nothing. If this perspective on history resonates, consider subscribing and sharing which country you are watching from. 6 weeks earlier, Segoville, Texas. 6 weeks before the incident with the dropped cup, the heat at Segoville was the true warden. It was an oppressive, wet blanket draped over the red soil of Texas, clinging to the tar paper roofs and settling into the seams of their government-issue cotton clothing. It was early September 1944. Ilse ran a damp cloth over the back of her neck. The barracks smelled of lye soap, boiled cabbage, and the faint, dusty scent of 20 women trying to maintain dignity in confinement. Across the narrow room, Greta, a Lutheran from Hamburg, was meticulously folding her thin blanket, her movements stiff and precise. Dusk bled across the high windows, turning the sky from a brutal white to a bruised purple. With the fading light came the ritual anxiety. "It is almost time," Greta whispered, not looking at Ilse. Her gaze remained fixed on the window, watching the perimeter lights begin to hum. Ilse nodded, her hand slipping into the pocket of her dress. Her fingers found the familiar, smooth comfort of the wooden beads. The rosary was small, carved from olive wood, a confirmation gift from her grandmother. It was her last tangible link to the parish in Stuttgart, to a life before the FBI investigations, the enemy alien designation, and the long train ride south. "We should not risk it together," Ilse murmured, moving closer to Greta. "The patrol." "They are godless," Greta stated, repeating the propaganda that had been their daily bread for years.
Capitalists.
"They do not respect the cloth."
They will take them. They will burn them.
The thought came to Ilse, sharp and cold, a chilling counterpoint to the Texas humidity. She pictured the newsreels from Berlin, the bonfires of degenerate books. The state propaganda machine had assured them the Americans did the same, only with Bibles. Ilse looked around the long room. Frau Meyer was already asleep or pretending to be, her face turned to the wall. 2 other women were mending socks, their needles flashing in the gloom. Safety was an illusion, perhaps by the latrines, Ilse suggested. The smell, no, too open. The sound came suddenly, the crunch of heavy boots on the gravel path just outside their barracks. Both women froze. A beam of light from a guard's torch swept across the exterior wall, momentarily illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air.
Ilse flinched, a purely physical reaction to the light.
Her hand, slick with sweat, jerked in her pocket. The rosary slipped from her grasp. She caught it against her thigh just before it could hit the wooden floor.
A small, dry sound, a tick of wood against fabric.
It felt as loud as a gunshot. Greta's eyes widened. Ilse did not breathe. She deftly, quickly, slid the beads from her pocket and shoved them deep into the rolled cuff of her sleeve. The guard's shadow passed the window and continued down the line. The cicadas resumed their deafening chorus. Greta let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since she arrived. "See, it is impossible." She walked to her cot and turned her back, a clear signal that the conversation was over. Ilse returned to her own bed. The need for the Kyrie, for the simple comfort of the Hail Mary, ached in her chest. But the fear was greater. She pulled the thin blanket up to her chin, her hand still clutching the rosary, hidden inside her sleeve. In the suffocating dark of the barracks, she began to pray in silence, moving her thumb over the beads, one by one. For 3 days, a strained silence settled over the barracks. The women performed their assigned duties, weeding the Victory Garden under the oppressive sun, scrubbing floors, sorting mail for the camp censor, with a brittle efficiency. The shared ritual, even in its silent, individual form, had been fractured. Frau Meyer was deteriorating. She had been a respected merchant's wife from Cologne, and the humiliation of internment had hollowed her out. She moved slowly, her hands trembling, often forgetting where she was. More than the others, she seemed consumed by the fear of divine abandonment. She approached Ilse near the washing sinks, her voice barely audible over the sound of running water. "Fräulein Ilse, please!" Ilse continued scrubbing her uniform against the washboard, the coarse lye soap stinging her knuckles.
"Please what, Frau Meyer?"
"The rosary. Just 1 decade, I cannot
remember the words alone."
"The air," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the open door. "It feels empty of God." Ilse stopped scrubbing. She felt a sharp pang of guilt, followed immediately by a surge of fear. Praying alone, silently, in her cot was one thing. Praying with someone involved whispers, responses, a shared space. It constituted a meeting, A rule posted in the mess hall, translated into crude German, forbade unauthorized gatherings. "We cannot," Ilse said, more harshly than she intended. "It's too dangerous. If they hear us—" Frau Meyer's face crumpled. She did not argue. She simply nodded, her chin trembling, and turned to shuffle away. "Wait!" Ilse called out, unable to bear the sight. The image of her own grandmother flashed in her mind. What kind of Catholic am I, she thought, to deny this? Not here. She scanned the compound. The gardens were too exposed, the barracks too crowded. Her eyes landed on the utility shed at the end of the line, the laundry and ironing room. It was hot, filled with steam, and rarely used after the evening meal. "Tonight," Ilse whispered, grabbing the older woman's arm. "After count. Bring your rosary." Hours later, the camp was quiet, suffocating under the heavy blanket of the Texas night. The final head count was done. Ilse and Frau Meyer slipped out of the barracks, keeping to the shadows. The laundry room was unlocked as always. The air inside was thick with the metallic smell of stale water, bleach, and hot metal from the unplugged irons. It was dark, save for the sliver of moonlight coming through the single dirty window. "Here," Ilse said, leading Frau Meyer to the farthest corner, behind a rack of damp, pressed linens. Frau Meyer was shaking, either from fear or palsy. Ilse could not tell. She fumbled in her pocket.
Ilse reached out, steadying her. "It is all right."
"We are safe here." From her own sleeve, Ilse retrieved her rosary. Frau Meyer pulled hers out. It was a beautiful thing, made of dark garnet beads. Then Frau Meyer produced one more item, a small, perfectly ironed white handkerchief, perhaps her last piece of fine linen from home. She spread it carefully on the dusty floor between them. It was not an altar, but in the dim light, it felt like one. Ilse took the lead. "Hail Mary, full of grace." Frau Meyer's voice joined hers, a reedy, trembling whisper.
"Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners."
As they prayed, the fear began to recede, replaced by a profound, shared peace. They were hidden, but for these few moments, they were free. They finished the decade, made the sign of the cross, and sat in silence. Frau Meyer wept quietly, tears of gratitude. Ilse picked up the white handkerchief, folded it, and handed it back to her.
As they stood to leave, a shadow passed the window.
A young guard, Private Evans, was walking his late-night patrol. He slowed, stopped, and peered into the darkness of the utility shed. Ilse and Frau Meyer moved like ghosts, melting back into the barracks seconds after Private Evans passed. They did not speak, separating immediately and climbing into their respective cots. Ilse did not bother to undress. She lay flat on her back, her heart hammering against her ribs, the thin mattress scratching her back. She slid her own rosary back into its hiding place, deep inside the hem of her mattress. But she knew Frau Meyer was not so careful. The older woman was exhausted, emotionally drained by their secret prayer. Ilse heard her settle into her cot near the door, sighing deeply, before falling into a troubled sleep. An hour passed. The barracks was tomb-silent, save for the ever-present drone of insects and the occasional cough. Ilse stared at the ceiling beams, invisible in the blackness, her mind racing. He saw us. He must have seen us leaving. She replayed the moment at the window, the silhouette of his cap, the way he paused. He knew they were somewhere they should not be. Then came the sound. The crunch of gravel stopping right outside their door. Ilse's body went rigid. This was not a patrol. This was a stop. The door creaked open, hinges protesting. A cone of yellow light stabbed the darkness. Private Evans stepped inside, his flashlight beam sweeping the room. He played the light over the sleeping forms, row by row. Ilse squeezed her eyes shut, feigning sleep, her entire body braced for the light to hit her, for the harsh command to get up. The beam passed over her and moved on. It lingered on Greta, who was sleeping facing the wall. Then it stopped. Ilse opened her eyes a fraction. The beam was fixed on Frau Meyer's cot. Frau Meyer had fallen asleep clutching her garnet bead rosary. Her hand lay outside the thin blanket, the dark beads, starkly visible against her pale, wrinkled skin, pooled in the center of the intense light. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. Evans did not move for what felt like an eternity. He simply stood there, his profile backlit by the doorway, the flashlight aimed like a weapon at the forbidden object. Ilse could see the tiny glint of light reflecting off the small metal cross attached to the beads. This was it, the proof, the contraband, the confirmation of their illegal worship. Ilse's stomach tightened. They will punish us all. They will take everything. Evans took a half step toward the cot. Frau Meyer stirred, murmuring something in German, her fingers tightening around the beads. The guard hesitated. He lowered the beam slightly. Ilse could not see his face, only his silhouette. He seemed impossibly young, a boy playing soldier. He must have seen what it was. Not a weapon, not a transmitter, just beads. He stood there for another second, then, with a sharp click, the flashlight went dark. He backed out of the room, pulling the door closed with a quiet thud. The sound of his boots retty-ding on the gravel path was swallowed by the night. Ilse let out a breath she did not know she was holding, but the relief was cold.
He had seen.
He had not confiscated it, which could only mean one thing. He was reporting it. The morning would bring the real punishment, the official repercussion from the camp commander. No one else in the barracks spoke, but Ilse knew by the stillness, by the quality of the silence, that no one was sleeping anymore. They were all just waiting for the sun. The sun rose with hostile speed, burning away the night's thin layer of cool air. No one spoke during the morning roll call. The women moved with a dreadful robotic compliance. Ilse watched Private Evans take his place in the guard line. He did not look toward their barracks. He looked straight ahead, his face impassive. Ilse's hands felt cold, despite the climbing heat. She had secured her own rosary in its hiding place, but she knew Frau Meyer's was still in her pocket, a dangerous liability. The summons came just after the thin morning meal of oatmeal and chicory coffee. A sergeant, a man Ilse did not recognize,
strode into their barracks, his boots loud on the floorboards. Barracks 4B, all of you outside, courtyard, 5 minutes. His German was halting. Brutal! A cold sickness washed through Ilse. This was it.
Barracks 4B, all of us. Collective punishment, just as the propaganda had warned. Greta caught Ilse's eye, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Frau Meyer was trembling so badly she could barely stand. Ilse took the older woman's arm, supporting her as they filed out into the blinding white sunlight of the courtyard. They stood in a ragged line, 20 women squinting against the glare, the dust already settling on their shoes. The heat was a physical weight. The only sound was the sharp thwack, thwack, thwack of the American flag straining against its metal pole in the hot breeze. Major Davis, the camp commandant, emerged from the administration building. He was a tall man, older than the guards, with graying hair and a face that rarely betrayed emotion. He held a single sheet of paper. Ilse knew with sickening certainty that it was Evans's report. He stopped 10 feet in front of them, scanning their faces. Ilse stared at a button on his shirt, unable to meet his eyes. "Last night," he began, his voice calm, "a guard reported a violation of camp rules. A potential contraband item was observed in this barracks." Frau Meyer let out a small, choked sound. Ilse squeezed her arm. "He reported," Davis continued, "what he believed to be beads." The silence stretched. Ilse braced herself for the order to be strip-searched, for the barracks to be torn apart. Major Davis looked down at the report, then up at them. The expected anger never came. Instead, his expression was one of curiosity. or perhaps simple pragmatism. "This report is incomplete," he said, folding the paper. He put it in his pocket. He did not yell. He did not threaten. "Raise your hand," he commanded, "if you are Catholic." Ilse's head snapped up. She stared at him, bewildered. What did this mean? Was this a new way to divide them? She saw 3, then 4, then 5 other hands go up, hesitant. Ilse slowly raised her own. Frau Meyer, sensing the shift, also raised a trembling hand. Davis counted them. 7, he made a note in a small book. "Now," he said, "raise your hand if you are Lutheran." Greta, looking just as confused as Ilse, raised her hand.
Along with most of the others. 13. All right. Davis nodded.
As if this confirmed something he already suspected. He surveyed the line of women, their faces a mixture of terror and utter confusion. "Well, that is all," he said, turning on his heel. "Return to your duties." He walked back into the administration building, leaving 20 women standing in the hot sun, their world tilted slightly on its axis. The interrogation they had feared had become a census. The commandant's bizarre census left the women of Barracks 4B in a state of agitated confusion. The expected punishment had not materialized, replaced by a vacuum of uncertainty that was, in its own way, just as unsettling. They were watched, they were counted, but they were not punished.
It made no sense. 2 days later, the activity began. It started at a derelict barracks at the far end of the compound, near the south fence.
The building had been used for storage, its windows boarded up, its paint peeling. Ilse and Greta, assigned to weeding the dusty perimeter of the garden nearby, had a clear view. A U.S. Army truck rumbled to a stop, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Private Evans and another guard jumped from the back, followed by 3 male internees, Germans captured from a merchant ship and held in a separate section of Seagoville. The women rarely interacted with them. "What is this?" Greta whispered, keeping her head down as she yanked a stubborn weed. "More fences, perhaps," Ilse murmured, her hands chilling despite the heat. "Or solitary cells."